Good morning. I'm Bruce Taylor with Data Center Dynamics, and welcome to another in our series of DCD debate webinars, where we, in full public view, chew on the bone of a worthy topic about the present and future of the data center and the full stack digital infrastructure required to power the world's business. I have to say that I'm flying with a hood over my head today because I've lost the view of the console for this webcast, but I looked at all of you as you came into the room. You're exceedingly good looking and very smart. So first, a quick bit of housekeeping, if I may. As you see the polling questions pushed to the screen, by Denica in the London office, who can see the dashboard. Please take the time to answer it. We'd like to get your opinion so that we can report it back to everyone during the webinar. Also, please, during the webinar, as things occur to you, you wish to ask a question, do that. And we will get to them either in the context of the question we're in, or we may hold it to the end of the webinar and get to it. If we don't get to it, we will answer you. You will get an answer very quickly after the webinar is over. So I wanted to start this with my usual bit of history, going back to my earliest days in observing the data center, having come from the IT side of the business. But I thought I'd actually start with an anecdote, if I might, just a short one. I'm at the Albuquerque airport. I'm in the parking lot shuttle on the way to the terminal to fly out to Toronto, where I'm speaking to you now. And a guy gets on. He's got a very big bag with him, and he's got a fly rod with him. And I said, and he's a pretty well-seasoned guy. He's probably a decade younger than I am, but he's along. And I said, where are you going? And he said, Prineville. That's in Oregon. And I said, going fly fishing? He said, nah. He said, I'm actually going for training. And I said, oh, you must be on the startup team for the Facebook Los Lunas campus. And he said, yes. He said, how did you know that? And I said, just a guess. And then I thought to myself, as he got off, that the world he's about to walk into isn't like anything he's seen before. And it occurs to me that that's kind of the way all of us are as this world speeds up, becomes increasingly more digital. The full effects of Industry 4.0 and digital transformation begin to take effect. So I say that as kind of a setup for this, because probably nothing typifies that more than the topic that we have today. AI and machine learning have come to the data center. I looked at who's in the room with us today, and there are people out there who I know have been on this trail for 3 or 4 years or more. So I acknowledge you for being here. Welcome, and I know that you can be provocative. And we're now heading for the era of the true, smart, lights-out, autonomous data center that we've all been talking about. We are in the Industry 4.0 era of digital transformation in the data center itself. So today I'm joined by 3 subject matter experts in this area: Jim Kerberry from Cisco, John Miller from IBM, who's a fill-in, who joined us very late with no notice, and we sure appreciate his willingness to be in this conversation. And Enzo Greco with Enlight, a company that has become iconic in the data center infrastructure management space, and so glad to have him with us. Gentlemen, let's dive right into this if we can. Jim Kerberry, I'm going to start with you. Why machine learning in the data center? Why now? What's changed? What's driving this? Can you step up to that?
Yeah, sure, Bruce. Thank you. This is Jim Kerberry with Cisco IT, and thank you everybody for attending today. So in Cisco, what we have been doing over the last few years is deploying tools into the data center infrastructure, like many of you in enterprises, that affect the DCIM or the layer one data. So data center infrastructure management tools are one of the key systems of record for artificial intelligence and machine learning data sets. And when you think about the data that is now there, we say that our data set is, 95% accurate or even higher today because of the accuracy of these tools, the way the data is collected, the way that it's managed, gives us a higher accuracy rate of this data. And now this data can be used on-prem, off-prem, in different scenarios that allow us to do many things in the data center. I'm sure we're going to talk about the use cases today, but there are many use cases that I think we can talk about. Just think about the number of racks, RUs, space, and different data elements in a data center. If you can capture those deep data elements and start performing analytics, there's an unlimited number of use cases that can be applied in the data center. So really, the tools have evolved, the data sets have evolved, and now's the time to take advantage of this deep learning and AI technologies, because the data is there and it's good.
And so, can you follow on to that?
Sure. I certainly would enjoy that. And one of the things that we are seeing is, if you're looking at the macro trends in the data center, you have the scale, complexity, and optimization of modern data centers. The larger data centers are getting ever larger, either through consolidation or organically. If we look at the fabric of data centers, from centralized data centers to new additions like Edge, you have an ever richer fabric. And then you have companies like DLR and Equinix, who are run as real estate trusts, for whom optimization is paramount. So one of the biggest drivers are these macro trends that are forcing the analytics, because you simply cannot manage the scale and complexity with traditional means. And analytics is just an ideal platform for achieving the optimal outcomes.
And John, can you add on to this? I know you're new to this and just joined us a bit ago, but I don't mean new to the topic. You're certainly not new to that. But do you have a reflection on this?
Yeah, I do. I agree with what Jim was talking about with the DCIM. That's certainly an area that I'm well familiar with. What's interesting to me, as we do add more of the AI and machine learning in it, I kind of liken that to a diversified team, where before you had the individual disciplines, let's say. Now we are starting to bridge those with these kind of tools, the AI and machine learning, that reaches out beyond the traditional scope. But like you said, kind of you come from an IT side. I started on the FM side, facility management, and there's this huge gap in between that this bridges. But the key is it's not like what it does is bring all of those groups together in a way that we're now sharing ideas that, just like diversification on a team, as I mentioned, it's always a smart thing to do, because you bring more ideas to the table and more ideas for use cases, as well as how you proceed with fixing issues.
That's a really important point. I'm sure glad you brought that up. I think that we have been waiting for what is going to finally bring the two, the north of the rack and the south of the rack, together in the data center, and this may be it. So, Enzo, you have said this before, and I think it's directional. You hinted at it just a bit ago. Technology is nothing without the use cases. They have to be compelling. Given that, what do you see, if you had to pick out of the top three, what do you see as being the number one, or what is a very big and highly leveraged opportunity that data centers really have to take on that machine learning can enable?
One of the biggest ones, I'd have to say, is workload optimization. And if you look at what's driving workload optimization and why analytics and machine learning are particularly suited to target its outcomes. It's, again, look at the very rich fabric that we have. It's not just the question of, do I run the workload on this server or that server or this rack or that rack? Now we have a much richer environment across data centers, across hybrid environments, colos. Perhaps we have platform as a service up in the cloud. We have different edge computing. And if we look at all that, what is one of the real attractions of applying machine learning to workload optimization is doing full stack, not just looking at the software side, not just looking at the virtual machine side, but taking into account the entire full stack from critical infrastructure up. If I'm going to move a load to a targeted data center or a targeted rack, does it have enough capacity? What is its power history? Can I predict any security issues? So incorporating that full stack into workload optimization, we are seeing as one of the biggest drivers and interests and investment areas for customers in analytics. That would be my top.
So this is a question that occurs to me as you've just said that, and maybe Jim, you can address it. Does that suggest that the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure side, now part of workload optimization, is that in real time? Is that real-time analytics that are driving that?
It can be, absolutely. And in fact, think about it. If you start in the simplest form, the physical layer one data, once you have that accurate and in a good data set, that can be both historical and real time. So you can capture energy data real time. You have real time information on racks, models, product IDs in your data centers, and then you can take that data at the layer one and begin to automate layers 4 through 7. So you can connect the layers together so that you can begin to see workloads in their physical form and then workloads in their virtual form.
John Miller, that sound right to you?
Yes, it does. I would agree with what they said, but also I would certainly bring in the resiliency, for our business in IBM that I work in, which is our strategic outsourcing arm of resiliency services. We work with thousands of client accounts within our data centers, and obviously we want to ensure that they never go down. So resiliency is the number one use case for us, among others. But that resiliency also kind of has broadened in scope. Before it was, the physical resiliency. Now it's going to be things more like, the across silos. It's going to be everything. In fact, when you look at the chart here, it's everything from, your inventory that's cataloged to your relationships of and connections of network as well as power, thermal with computational fluid dynamics capability, so that you can even address those things that may not be, intuitively obvious that are through some of the tools and the AI and kind of systems that we have today. So yeah, it's broadened that, and it's also extended it. Where now you're seeing people are looking at weather patterns. They're looking at everything external as well as the internal to the data center kinds of things that come into play. So the resiliency use case, it's morphed into something more large than it used to be. But and the more you do that and more you add that kind of scope and complexity, clearly you're having to look at something beyond just what a guy can go through on a spreadsheet these days. Yeah,
John, I agree with that. This is Jim Grabari. So I think just to piggyback on that, if you think about it, when we do in today's environment, we do a lot of things physically. So we have workloads that are being requested for the data center, and those are either planned, sometimes reserved physically in systems. In the future, if we could take the data on the current environment real time and then use predictive analysis to really predict where those workloads should be physically installed, that could take into consideration both your resiliency case and an optimization of space and power all at the same time. And you can also include on-prem and off-prem as well.
So Jim, that really got at Jim, that really amplified what I was asking before, that now we can manage, in theory, we can manage the physical infrastructure optimization and capacity in a real-time way as part of workload management. And I guess I'm saying that as a statement, but that really is a question. Enzo?
I agree on that point very much, Jim. Excuse me, I agree on that point very much, Bruce.
Right. So one of the things, Enzo, that you mentioned in passing, and I don't want to step over it because I think it is there are enormous benefits to be had in the area of energy optimization. As we continue to grow and power consumption continues to grow and density in racks continues to grow, we have lots of work to do in this area, all of us, in how we, in fact, not only conserve but clean our energy sources. And it seems to me this is such a natural fit in this domain. And so, is that do you have a perspective on that?
Yes, and in fact, this is a very interesting point, and I'd like to add from direct customer and market interaction 2 anecdotes on this. So the first is, if we look at the flexibility in many of the new technologies that are finding their way into data centers, such as precision cooling down to perhaps rack cooling, row cooling, and all the different kinds of technologies that we have, there are so many options and so many configurations that we often don't get it right. And we find different thermal systems, for example, competing with each other. And one of the interesting points is we now have so much complexity and we have so much data input that we often overlook the key points. And of course, the whole role of any analytics system, especially a cognitive analytics system, is to find those valuable and unique patterns across the vast amount of inputs. So that's where we are finding tremendous interest in analytics all around the area of energy optimization, especially with the trends in energy costs and the extreme sensitivity in the data center market recently about being green and being a good citizen. So that's one perspective. The second is we are seeing firsthand, especially from the larger data center operators, the ability to very accurately forecast energy usage so that they can negotiate perhaps the better contracts for future energy. Perhaps they can hedge their energy demands. But one of the interesting, very immediate evolving areas for around energy optimization is accurately predicting future usage. And that is a most interesting area.
No question. Not just usage itself, but the mix of sustainables in that usage forecast, the quality of the power in the forecast, all of those things, it seems to me, benefit from this. Jim, do you agree with that?
I do. And in fact, again, just taking a simple use case, we should never, again, have a situation once we deploy these types of systems, AI and predictive analytics, where a busway system is overloaded or a path is overloaded on an energy system. That shouldn't happen, right? And today it happens because we're still doing, in some cases, manual placements, and maybe we don't understand the real energy load, and therefore sometimes things get overloaded. Maybe not in data centers, but it still happens in labs and rooms that are remote to the data center that could still cause a significant outage. So these use cases, even though they're very core to the data center, do go beyond the data center as well.
So, John Miller, I want to direct this next one at you, and I'm going to try to spit it out as cleanly as I can. the co-location market has a marketing need, so you tend to see more from the marketers of colo and the marketers of cloud services on new technologies because they see it as a way of differentiating. And I don't mean that disparagingly at all. If you're an enterprise data center owner-operator, you have no reason to talk to the public outside of your own walls about technologies that you are adopting and deploying, right? So I want to look, if I can, for a minute at each of what I consider to be the major classes of data center, and correct me if I step over anything. But we certainly have the legacy enterprise data center. That hasn't gone away, isn't going away. It's changing. It's upgrading all the time. People are finding new ways to sweat the assets of capacity. We have the new breed of the edge data center, and probably somewhat companion to that, but not exactly analogous, the high performance compute, supercompute data center. Of the classes of data centers, is there any one that stands out as being the biggest beneficiary? Is the web scale, hyperscale, are they the biggest beneficiary of AI? Where's AI fit in the basket of the enterprise data center owner operator?
That's an interesting question because first off, let me just say one thing, and that's with the legacy data center, when you're speaking of IBM and their strategic outsourcing business, it does get the same kind of scrutiny as any colo would, as one would expect, that they want to make sure that they have that kind of environment that's, with tender loving care. But it's interesting because, when you think of all those different data centers, I mean, they all benefit hugely. And I think, even size-wise, if we're talking about everything from a small data center to a legacy-sized data center, what we've seen is where people used to look at certain things like number of racks, maybe even the inventory on the rack, but and they'd have a staff force that would look at that. Now they're looking at the micro scale of this. It's not just the devices. It's the physical. It's the virtual. It's every connection point. It's the applications that are running on it. So even a small kind of data center, still it's gone beyond what just a normal person can monitor, adequately without the AI and machine learning. But I guess I would say the major beneficiary of those would be those that are mostly engaged in the commercial, leasing out of their services, because of the expectation from a myriad of customers. They're not just reporting to their own internal, but obviously having to react to any outage on any one becomes a political or it becomes well known, and it's a reputational thing. So probably mostly there because of, like you said, the visibility before, but the things that are happening, the kind of data that we're having to pull together now, it's all of them benefit.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I'm going to go to some questions now because we have some coming in. And I believe Denica has pushed the first polling question. Again, I apologize for flying blind, but there we are. So every single one of these questions is spot on to what we're talking about. So the first one is just simply this. Which are the specific problems of most importance that ML and AI would most profitably resolve? So this goes back to the use cases. And so this is really about the, I would say, the ROI and TCO, if you will, of a use case. So of the ones that we mentioned earlier, is there any one that stands out as having the greatest financial leverage?
Well, Bruce, this is Jim Corbari. I can take a stab at that. So I think there are definitely many use cases we could discuss, but the one a longtime data center manager comes to my mind is that hardware predictive analysis, fault analysis, is one that has true hard dollar savings as well as availability savings. So that one's a real one. So being able to take all of the data that's being generated by these advanced systems, in our case it's UCS, and we hope you love that product, taking those data elements and being able to predict future failures, future problems, whether it's a fan slowing down or speeding up, or whether it's a hard drive that needs replaced on a storage array. If we can get those data to our DevOps teams, we can make replacements, make sure systems stay up and available, and we don't have those outages that enterprise data centers as well as customer-facing data centers, always plan to avoid. So I think that's a critical one. The hardware predictive analysis use cases is one that I think is right there.
And John, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's certainly one of them. But what I find and again, with our environment, and I think it would be the same with any colo facility, is you don't always have the opportunity to pick what equipment is brought into your data center environment. So for us, what we found was the first best major cost takeout opportunity was looking at the amount of power for cooling. So we focused heavily on the thermal environment and had tools that kind of brought computational fluid dynamics capability at the operational level, so that you could very basically there you don't have to necessarily go through the analysis of every server on the floor and what can be consolidated, et cetera. But you're looking at the fact that at least in our experience, about every data center we went into was pumping about 3 times as much cooling into the data center as was really required. And in fact, every time they'd see a hot spot, they'd crank up a computer room air conditioner unit instead of what we ended up doing was turning 40% of them off and balancing it. So that became a huge cost takeout for us.
So that just actually answered another question right on the nose, so I can pass that one by. And so this is one that is a more general question, again, coming from the economic benefit side. Do you have any examples of organizations that have achieved ROI for their AI or ML initiatives? So Enzo, I'll start with you.
Sure. So as I think the 2 use cases that we already went through are that both Jim and John highlighted are certainly the 2 most important and visible, but they are slightly different. So as John said, the energy optimization is direct on the cost side, and again, it goes to the point of there's so much complexity and options in a data center that simply changing the set point is not sufficient. You need to look at all of the interconnected systems. It's a perfect use case for analytics, and it's where there's some really good returns in the market that are, in fact, well published and well understood. On the preventive maintenance side, that is another one that Jim already hit, but I want to add one piece to it because this is a perfect use case for analytics, because you cannot do this level of preventative maintenance or failure prediction without analytics, because you are not trying, for example, you are looking as granular as possible within a unit. So rather than simply generically saying that server may fail, if you had information about the components, the manufacture of the different components within a server, from the disk drives, the memory chips, if you knew what applications ran, if you knew when those applications ran, where those servers were placed inside of the data center, perhaps some of that input is irrelevant in the final outcome, but the whole art of analytics is to analyze all of the different inputs, find those unique patterns, and get to the optimal outcomes. And there is it is one of the seminal use cases for analytics, and bringing that into the data center, we are finding customers are getting very good ROI, although it is measured differently than energy. In this case, the ROI is based on availability. is based on increased life of the individual unit, is based on any other number of factors. So great ROI in both cases, but different types.
Any other thoughts on this question?
Just one other angle I would bring in, because even though it's may not be AI specific, it's another one when you're looking at your ROI and the AI enables it, and that would be, we're right now pushing the automated workflow through, to add to our data center tooling. What this app enabled us to do is, one, open up the access to the tools to a broader audience, down to teams that are not necessarily core to operating the data center, but manage their servers within that environment, et cetera, where we could bring them in. But because they have a structured workflow, we can and role-based, we can provide, we know who's doing what and what they need to do, and at the same time, what that does is kind of drives a lot of synergy in terms of workforce. So obviously, there will end up being a reduction to some degree, because now instead of everyone doing their own independent thing, they're doing it in a cohesive whole. So I think that's an ROI. Of course, we all look at. I don't really relish headcount reductions personally, but at the same time, it is something where you can redeploy, to and use the skills, to maybe do some of the things that would be better than collecting data and just looking at connections and things like that. But actually looking at the analysis and things that the AI brings to their table.
That really brings up the question that I had concerning organizational structure, the skills that are going to be needed in the future. I'm looking at this, frankly, older guy who is heading off to Facebook to train, and my guess is that the skill sets that are going to be required of him and others are going to change relatively dramatically because of the implementation of machine learning in the data center and other things as well. But nevertheless, we really are digitalizing major areas of operational management. What do you, the three of you, how do you look at what's changing in the skill sets that are required of the workforce?
Hey, Bruce, it's Jim Grabari. I'll take that first. So in Cisco IT, we have this strategy around software-defined everything, where we're connecting all systems, including the AI and ML systems, to our core systems. And as this environment grows and becomes converged or hyper-converged, I think the skill sets are too. So whereas maybe in the old days you had a guy in a data center that strictly looked at cabling systems, and very good skill to have, still need them, RCDDs. But maybe those skills will be converged with energy SCADA systems and energy power chain knowledge, and being able to integrate those skills as we evolve these systems, I think, is going to be critical. So facilities managers, any energy suppliers, compute and storage engineers, these may all become part of your DevOps team to manage this complex environment, and the skills definitely will be cross-functional.
So that really takes me to another question that perhaps both Cisco and IBM are great examples. Do you happen to know, this just intrigues me personally, frankly, are there active ongoing conversations within HR and within training and development around these kinds of career paths now within two of the most bleeding edge of technology companies? What's your sense of what you hear?
Absolutely.
In IBM,
yeah.
certainly we've. I'm sorry. Yeah, clearly within IBM,
Go ahead.
Our leadership has certainly already announced, that pretty much doubling the amount of training time for all the people, which is an opportunity, but also an expectation, to do exactly what you're saying, to recognize that transition and make sure that people are staying up to speed. In fact, it's kind of funny because I've had people ask me before with some of the folks working for me is what was their degree in college or something, and nowadays it's really more what certification do you have currently, that becomes more important because the speed of trying to keep up with all this stuff. But and obviously we'll have those hardcore disciplines in the data center like electricians, et cetera, always. But what we're seeing is the breadth of what they do is more far-reaching these days. In other words, it's the speed of getting the notification to them through AI and through machine learning, and also the predictive analysis that they'll get through that same media, and being able to utilize those tools to do what they in some cases to do their existing skills. But the point being is that the skills to learn how to use those tools to get that information to them and out to others quickly is actually the biggest transition in our data center workforce.
And Jim, I think I interrupted you, so please go ahead.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I let John. I think that was a good point, John. I agree with you. I think that's exactly what we see in Cisco as well, in Cisco IT. We had in the past, like many enterprises, data scientist programs, data analytics experts, and I think those things continue to evolve with software-defined roles and more of a move towards this. Again, I'm going to call it a hyper-converged skill environment where everyone is going to be expected to have a certain level of skill sets around data analytics, and maybe their core skill of the job that they're filling. But I don't think it's one unique career path, but I think it's skills and training that are going to be augmented to engineers, to data center managers, to database managers. Many career paths will be supplemented with these types of skills: AI, ML, and data analytics, data scientists.
So Enzo, I'm not trying to get you in any trouble here, so please forgive me, but you're out with customers all the time, or certainly Enlight is, and you have been through Enlight has been through the long slog of the DCIM market. So my query to you is, as you talk to customers, do you feel that they have the same sense of readiness that Cisco and IBM have? Same sense that they've got a readiness issue that needs to be confronted?
It will not surprise you if I say that it does depend on the customer, and it's not necessarily the size of the customer. So one of the interesting things that we see firsthand, and I'm sure everyone on the phone has witnessed this firsthand, is for the first time in a long time, traditional enterprise data centers need to compete with alternatives. And the alternative could be colo, the alternative could be an outsource center, the alternative could be cloud, platform as a service, and so forth. And so because of that, many traditional enterprise data centers need to justify or at least be prepared for benchmarking on alternatives. And that leads almost immediately to optimization, both of operations and costs. And if we go back to the scale and complexity of a typical data center, there's no better way of achieving that optimization than through analytics. So that, for those organizations that have begun analytics, that has often been a starting point.
Got it. So it occurs to me that this is an area where we're going to hear an awful lot more over time. And now I want to jump back to something that we began in this conversation. And I'm not sure that I heard the answer, so I'm going to just come back and whack at it again. In the legacy enterprise data center, does AI and machine learning have the same capacity for making significant change? And what I mean by significant change in this case is what we used to call sweating the assets. Do we buy back capacity? Do we increase the resiliency of an aging facility? Do we prevent the kind of accident from happening because we can move workloads quickly and avoid downtime in the legacy operations? So I'm not sure I'm articulating that exactly, but I'm going to ask John if he'll take a stab at that.
Okay, yeah, because that's currently the environment that I'm most familiar with. Obviously we're transitioning more and more into a cloud environment. To be honest with you, and some of the discussions with my own management, we've started to dub the legacy environment more as a hybrid cloud because, in honesty, with the infusion of the AI tools that we're bringing to bear to do all the things you said in terms of proper layout, capacity planning, but actually implementation of those things in the legacy environment. We a lot of times it's really just the facility itself is the same, whether it's a legacy enterprise or whether it's cloud for the most part. I mean, you're talking about different applications, maybe a different setup of pods, et cetera, but still, the environment that they sit in is very similar. It's just you tend to have more what I call customization in the legacy side. And maybe for that reason, it requires it even more because it's so diverse that it's easier to, make mistakes perhaps than, because you're not working with like type things as frequently and you have to be careful with everything you touch. The diversity of equipment in our data centers, for example, we've got over 15,000 different material types, in our data centers right now, which is, I know from some of the data center infrastructure managing teams that we've worked with before that was a substantial increase to what they traditionally were working with, but it's because of the legacy environment. So again, because of that kind of complexity, the AI may be even more important there.
Yeah, this is Jim.
And Jim,
John, to follow up, I agree with what John just said, and I would just restate, Bruce, that these use cases, whether it's energy optimization, proper placement of assets within your data center for both resiliency and workload management, those are applicable to both cloud systems as well as enterprise legacy systems or hybrid cloud environments, all the above. These use cases are not unique to whether it's on-prem or off-prem, in my mind.
I got that. Enzo?
I think going back to your original question of can a heritage data center, to use the term, how does that benefit equally to some of the newer data centers? They absolutely can, in some cases even more so. They may not have, for example, the same efficiency or the same PUE as a modern data center. So certainly they can benefit just as much. One of the challenges is whether they have the tooling available to actually affect some of the benefits of AI. So for example, if the focus is on energy optimization, are the systems actually in place, for example, to do precision cooling? So yes, they can absolutely benefit just as much, if not more so. The challenge usually comes in the implementation.
Got that. So here's a follow-on. Oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, just one follow-up. As we design newer data centers, obviously, we're using things like IoT and smarter devices. In a legacy data center, I think Enzo hit the nail on the head there, is as long as you can get to the data or interface with the data through software-defined programming, I think that's the key, is getting that data set and then refining that data set for your use case. I think that's one of the critical things is just getting access to the data.
One of the things that we haven't talked about at all is the idea that it's not simply the user data center's data that is where the big leverage is. It really is the pooling of data center operational analytics or big data sets from many, many data centers. How do we address A, the necessity for that, and then B, the security issues and privacy issues that accompany that? Who wants to take a stab at that?
Let me start this, and I'm sure that Jim and John can add more particular insight, or perhaps some of their own particular experiences. And this, as you know, Bruce, is one of the biggest areas, the ability to aggregate data from multiple installations. And, there are some great examples. So if you look, for example, at a UPS, being able to predict the failure of its batteries is paramount. You may have 6 UPSs installed in your data center, but there may be 3,000 others in the market. Being able to aggregate that data in some meta form and will give you a far better prediction, far better outcome, far more insight than simply looking at the 6 UPSs you may have installed. And many of the vendors have announced directions in this area. But this is a very important point. If we also go back to the importance of preventative maintenance, there is only so much insight you can get from your own installation, but being able to have access to that from a pool across the industry, that's absolutely invaluable.
So my next area, go ahead, John, please.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add to that because clearly we have a lot of our strategic outsourcing customers that require, for example, for disaster recovery purposes, to be east and west of the Mississippi, for example, so knowing what the workloads are in those environments and when you may want to have to implement a DR failover or something like that. Clearly AI is tremendous importance. When you're looking at getting down to the application moves and that sort of thing, because it involves so many different parameters that you have to make sure go with a particular an app is it's not just one little thing that goes over. It's maybe networked to a whole bunch of others that go with it. So clearly that's very important.
So how would you three recommend that a data center that hasn't yet begun this journey, and we've got the polling question about that, and I can't see it, so I can't tell you what people are saying, but it occurs to me that the vast majority, I haven't read any statistic yet on the implementation of AI in data centers, the application. My guess is it's going to be somewhere around 5% or under for the entire data center stock. I don't know if anybody has an opinion on that or knowledge of that, but we're still very early days. So in most cases, people are going to want to take a first tentative step in the water. I have 2 questions that relate to this as we begin to wind down. The first question is, who needs to be at the table? Who needs to be in the planning and the very earliest stages of an AI related machine learning project? And Jim, I'm going to start with you for that.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. So in the early planning stages, I would think that although it goes across the enterprise, obviously where you would start with is if there's a data scientist team or an analytics team in your organization, and they are beginning to form some AI use cases, I think bringing these use cases for the data center to that forum, to that committee, and adding that to at least the dashboard, right? So that now the data center use cases are a part of the enterprise knowledge base, if you will, of use cases that need to be addressed. And I think that data center managers, obviously facilities engineers, and data center planners are definitely a part of that conversation at the table when it comes to the data center.
And how about people from the data science side of things? Are they important?
Yeah, absolutely, because obviously you need there are many tools, obviously, we can choose from. Obviously, IBM has a few that people are familiar with. And so I think one of the things that have to be reconciled with the use cases is, it may not be a one-size-fits-all for every use case. So the tools are going to have to be, reviewed and analyzed, the approaches, the data sets, and you need data science people to help you do that.
And Enzo?
I think on this point, unfortunately, my screen just blanked out here, Bruce. But on this,
you're joining
I
me.
think we're all suffering. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Jim on this point. And one of the areas that I will add is if we look at one of the great places to start for analytics, my strong suggestion would be focus on use cases. Do not build an analytics platform for the sake of the analytics platform. It is always best to start with use cases because the use cases will drive return and it will identify stakeholders and it will get the right people involved in the process. So my very strong suggestion and observation is to start with use cases.
And so this is John. I would absolutely agree with that. What I would also add to that, and this is just from my own experience, that I've been fortunate enough to be in a team, a small team, but one that the diversity of skills is incredible, and everything from strategy guys to operational. So that operational experience, the good thing is that those of us that are working strategy are listening, to that. And even though in many cases it may be what you consider legacy experiential knowledge, they tend to know what works and what doesn't and how best to do it. And then if you couple that with the newer technologies as well, then you know that you're sort of addressing, like you said, from a use case standpoint and operational need, what really needs to be done. And sometimes that technology is sort of a breakthrough, though, and it changes things. So obviously we want that, and the folks who bring the new technology to bear as well, so we can see. But we always try to make sure it's in the context of how does that help my job easier, or for me to do things that maybe I only had this X amount of scope before, and now I've broadened that into these other arenas. And along with that, then we bring in, maybe associated team members, so that we can share and expand. We try to get at least one person with, a discipline that maybe we started with doing power, but now we've expanded into the network AI, that we try to reach out and make sure we get at least an expert in that area, maybe at the strategy level, as well as an operational guy, again, that needs to know, well, how do you build this into your data center infrastructure management tool, for example, the component level. So it's that kind of mix that I think is extremely important going forward, that it's not just a very high-level overview kind of team that's looking at, picking the right choice.
Yeah. And I will add one more point, which is, again, the importance of the use case. As with any time we're introducing new processes or new technology, it's really important to get those early wins. And that's another reason for focusing on the use case, because those early wins will also build engagement from the different teams that we need involved regardless. So that's another reason for focusing on the right use case for the organization.
So here's a question that I would ask of all three of you as we begin to rapidly wind down. I know Enlight has written use cases. There are papers that have been written to this. Do you think that, is there something that DCD should be looking at doing and following on and writing neutral use cases? I'm not suggesting that anybody is pushing their own wheat down the field, but are there use cases that we should be looking at from an editorial perspective that will help people understand and then be able to bring that external example back into their own shop and say, this is how, this is the kind of thing we need to be looking at. Is that needed in the information market? John?
I would defer. I would defer to Jim and John on this as very large end users. They probably have better insight.
Well, I mean, firsthand, it's a tough question because data center dynamics does cover such a comprehensive scope already within the data center. But I guess if I were to add one thing, it would be, and this is just, perception. You're walking through the floor at a data center dynamics event, and you're seeing all the component parts. And I know that there's, and I'm not saying you don't have this, but maybe a more focus on how it all comes together. And I know some of the DCIM tools do that, but it's even further than DCIM that these days. It's kind of like what you have on this agenda that we had here with everything from Internet of Things, in a tradition, in other words, outside of just the data center environment, but how do you bring everything together? So I mean, I'm trying to think of anything that you were missing, and that's not like you don't touch on that, but maybe a more in your face approach.
Yeah,
I
Bruce,
got that. That's useful.
I would say that roadmap, that development of that roadmap would be useful for all enterprises, big or small, because there are a lot of choices in the marketplace, and there are a lot of use cases that we've gone over many of them today. I think if you don't get that initial inertia going in the right direction and you get them out of order, for example, I believe that the use cases must start at the physical layer one, and then go from there. And if you try to skip a step, you may find out that you have to go back and redo some of that work. So I think a roadmap would be very helpful from DCD to help navigate this space because it's very complex.
Understood. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask now the kind of a left field question, and we're going to go out on this. And I have this idea that it's already being done in certain cases. We've seen it, but I think it's going to grow. We've been thinking about AI and machine learning in this case in kind of a large data set aggregated for managing the infrastructure. What happens when we start to see it, and who has any opinion on as we start to see it as augmented reality in the data center, which is absolutely in the field of AI in practical application in the data center. So that's an example. Do you have any other examples of things that we haven't talked about in this session that may be useful for people to start thinking about? So, Jim, I'm going to start with you, please.
Yeah, I think that there are definitely steps that organizations can take to begin this journey. And, from an agile or a, software development perspective, it's okay to come up with a hypothesis that you prove to be incorrect in your enterprise. I mean, that's the whole benefit of agile development and fast, failing fast kind of thing. So I think it's okay, especially in this space, to experiment and learn with your own environment so that you can get to the real use cases. I do think, however, there's extreme value that is there when you get to the more advanced use cases around workload management, both in the cloud and on-prem, that can be of high value to every organization. And I think those high-value use cases are definitely around both physical and logical workload management.
So, gentlemen, we're now down to the 2-minute mark, and so I'm going to ask John to respond and keep it short, and then Enzo, you're going to wrap us up and take us out. So, John.
Yeah, on that same topic, I guess I would just kind of point to, well, first off, that we actually did have some of the virtual reality or augmented reality, as you talk about, that does come into play, and it's very exciting when you see where someone can walk around the data center and just hold their cell phone up and get a view of the rack that compares it immediately to the back-end database. So you have the physical and the data that you can reconcile very rapidly in your when you're doing that. at the same time, as I mentioned before, with the different tiers that we have of, whether it's power, thermal, whatever, the idea behind that was that, if you have a platform that, accommodates those, you want to be receptive to the fact that each of those elements, whether it's inventory, power, thermal, whatever, that there's constant technology improvement in terms of the maturity of how you can do that. Like I said, you could start with spreadsheets, but at the end of the day, you want to get it where you're infusing more of the AI, things like RFID, things like, network discovery, things that, in fact, I say that in particular because coming at it from a DC-FM kind of angle, and now that we always had the vision of bridging it with IT service management, the network side has really opened our eyes to an extreme amount of AI that can come into play, and for initial discovery of the physical. So yeah, that's interesting.
Excellent. So Enzo, you're going to take us out.
So I'll add one point that I think addresses many of the questions and topics, which is historically in the data center, we've been reactive. Everything from failure to temperature control traditionally has been reactive. And with the proper implementation of analytics, that can change to be proactive. So if you had the ability to accurately predict everything from temperature to failure, how would you change the operations of the data center? And I think that's what we are seeing firsthand. That is the most intriguing area of focus for analytics, the shift from reactive to proactive.
That's a great way to go out on this. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We have now gone over the hour. I appreciate your time. This has been fascinating, and I sure got a lot out of it. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce.
And we're out.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks for everyone.